The storm had arrived without warning, the kind that turns the sky an unnatural shade of black and makes even experienced ranchers hesitate before stepping outside. Rain didn't fall gently, it slammed into the ground with violent force, soaking everything within seconds. Wind didn't simply blow, it howled, tearing across the land, bending fences, snapping branches, erasing familiar paths as if they had never existed. In conditions like these, every animal with instinct would seek shelter, huddle down, and wait for the chaos to pass. Every animal except one. Miles away from the nearest human presence, a lone horse stood at the edge of a flooded plain, its body trembling, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring as thunder cracked so close it made the ground shudder beneath its hooves. The horse was drenched, mane plastered to its neck, muscles tight with exhaustion, eyes wide with something far deeper than fear. This wasn't panic pushing it forward. It was urgency, sharp and focused, the kind that leaves no room for hesitation. As another explosion of thunder ripped through the sky, the horse made a decision no one was there to witness. It turned its body directly into the heart of the storm and began to run, not wildly, not blindly, but with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it needed to go. Each step became a fight for survival as thick mud clung to its legs, water splashed up to its chest, and debris flew past with dangerous speed. More than once, its hooves slipped, its body lurching dangerously close to the ground, but every time it forced itself upright, lungs burning, heart pounding, refusing to stop. The distance ahead was long even on a clear day, and tonight the landscape had transformed into a maze of danger. Roads had disappeared beneath rising water, landmarks were swallowed by darkness, and the wind pushed relentlessly against its body as if trying to drive it back. Still, the horse pressed on, driven by something invisible but powerful, something that made turning back impossible. Far ahead, on the other side of the storm, a ranch sat unaware of what was unfolding. Inside, the people there were focused on their own struggle, securing buildings, checking on animals already under their care, listening to weather updates that warned everyone to stay inside. No one expected movement outside, let alone a visitor, and certainly not in a storm already described as deadly. By the time the horse reached the outer boundary of the ranch, its strength was nearly gone. Its legs shook violently, each breath coming in harsh, uneven gasps as rain continued to pound down on its exhausted body. It slowed to a stagger, vision blurring, but it did not stop. With the last of its energy, it crossed the final stretch of land and reached the fence line, lifting its head toward the dark shape of the main house. Then it did something that would later leave everyone shaken. The horse didn't collapse. It didn't turn away. It stood there in the pouring rain and released a low, strained sound, filled with desperation, a sound that somehow cut through the roar of wind and rain just enough to reach inside the ranch house. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was something in it that made one of the ranchers pause mid-movement, an unexplainable chill running down their spine. In all their years working with animals, they had heard fear, pain, and distress, but this was different. This sounded like a message. Like a warning. Like a plea that could not be ignored. As the rancher moved toward the door, unaware of what they were about to face, the horse stood completely still in the storm, eyes fixed on the building, as if everything depended on what happened next, and in a way no one yet understood, it did. The door creaked open just enough to let the storm force its way inside, cold air and rain rushing in as the ranchers shielded their eyes against the darkness. At first, they saw nothing but sheets of rain slashing sideways, the yard barely visible under the flood of water and mud. Then the lightning struck again, briefly turning night into day, and in that split second, the shape became clear. A horse stood at the fence line, soaked to the bone, sides heaving with exhaustion, legs shaking so badly it looked as though they might give out at any moment. The rancher froze, heart pounding, disbelief washing over them. No animal should have been out in this storm, let alone one that had clearly traveled far. Instinct took over. Without fully understanding why, they grabbed a coat, shouted for help, and stepped outside, every step a battle against the wind trying to push them back. As they approached, the horse lifted its head again, eyes locking onto the rancher with an intensity that felt almost human. There was no aggression, no panic now, just urgency and a strange, almost pleading calm. The rancher spoke softly, words nearly lost in the storm, trying to soothe the animal while scanning its body for injuries. The horse was scraped and muddy, muscles twitching from strain, but there were no obvious wounds that explained why it had risked its life to be there. That's when the rancher noticed something unsettling. The horse kept turning its head, again and again, back toward the direction it had come from, then returning its gaze to the rancher, repeating the motion with increasing agitation. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. As if the horse was trying to say something without having the ability to speak. More people from the ranch emerged, drawn by the commotion, their faces registering the same confusion and concern. They tried to guide the horse toward shelter, to get it out of the storm, but it resisted gently, planting its hooves in the mud and pulling back toward the dark horizon. The message became impossible to ignore. This horse wasn't here for itself. It hadn't come seeking food or safety. It had come for a reason that lay somewhere beyond the ranch gates, somewhere out in the chaos it had just crossed. The realization sent a chill through everyone standing there, deeper than the cold rain soaking through their clothes. The storm continued to rage, but now a different kind of urgency filled the air. Questions raced through their minds. Had the horse escaped from somewhere nearby? Was there another animal injured? A person trapped? Why would a horse, driven by instinct and survival, run toward danger instead of away from it? The rancher looked again at the horse's eyes and saw something that made their stomach drop. This wasn't confusion. This was insistence. Time mattered. Without another word, the rancher made a decision that went against every safety warning they had heard that night. They grabbed a flashlight, tightened their grip on the gate, and looked back at the horse. The animal responded immediately, stepping forward despite its exhaustion, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. Behind them, someone shouted that it was too dangerous, that visibility was near zero, that the storm was getting worse. But the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that turning back now would mean something terrible. As the gate swung open and the wind howled louder, the horse took a step into the darkness, then paused, glancing back one last time, silently urging the humans to follow. And that was the moment everything changed, because whatever the horse had crossed a deadly storm to warn them about was still out there, waiting to be found. The moment they stepped beyond the safety of the ranch, the storm seemed to grow even more violent, as if offended by the decision to challenge it. Rain hammered down so hard it stung exposed skin, and the beam of the flashlight barely cut a few feet ahead before being swallowed by darkness. The horse moved first, slow but steady, hooves sinking into mud with every step, its body still trembling yet guided by an unbreakable sense of direction. The rancher followed closely, heart racing, every instinct screaming that this was a terrible idea, yet something deeper refusing to let them turn back. Each time the wind surged, it threatened to knock them off balance, and more than once the rancher had to grab the fence or brace against the ground to stay upright. The horse never looked back for long, only enough to make sure it was still being followed, then it pressed on, leading them away from warmth and light and into uncertainty. The path quickly became unrecognizable. What had once been a service road was now a river of fast-moving water, and the horse carefully tested each step before crossing, muscles tightening as it fought against the current. The rancher hesitated, fear gripping their chest, but the horse's steady presence pulled them forward. Every few steps, debris floated past, broken branches, pieces of fencing, things torn loose by the storm, each one a reminder of how dangerous this journey was becoming. Minutes felt like hours as they moved deeper into the storm, guided only by the horse's instincts and the faint hope that this risk meant something. Then the horse stopped suddenly, ears snapping forward, body going rigid. The rancher nearly collided with it, heart jumping into their throat as they scanned the darkness ahead. At first, there was nothing but rain and wind, but then they heard it, a sound barely audible beneath the storm, weak and uneven, like a cry struggling to be heard. The horse shifted restlessly, stamping the ground, head tossing as if urging the human to listen more closely. The sound came again, clearer this time, and the rancher's blood ran cold. It wasn't an animal call they recognized. It was human. Panic surged through them as they followed the sound toward a low-lying area where the land dipped sharply. The flashlight beam revealed water pooled far deeper than expected, swirling dangerously around what looked like the remains of a small structure. As they moved closer, the shape became horrifyingly clear. A person was trapped, clinging desperately to a broken fence post, body half submerged, strength clearly fading with each passing second. The storm had cut them off, leaving them isolated and invisible in the chaos, and without the horse's intervention, no one would have known they were there until it was far too late. The rancher shouted, voice cracking, trying to reach the person while searching desperately for a way across the water. The horse stepped forward again, without hesitation, positioning itself in front of the rancher, testing the depth with careful steps as if measuring the risk. Every movement was deliberate, despite its exhaustion, despite the danger. The realization hit hard and fast. This horse hadn't just come to the ranch for help. It had come because it knew exactly who was in danger and exactly where to find them. It had crossed a deadly storm not for food or shelter, but to save a life that could not save itself. As the rancher prepared to make a desperate attempt to reach the trapped person, guided by the horse's unwavering determination, one terrifying question lingered in the air. How much time was really left, and would their courage be enough to match the sacrifice this animal had already made? The water surged violently around the broken fence post, each wave slamming into it as if trying to tear the trapped person away. The rancher's breath came fast and shallow as they assessed the situation, mind racing through possibilities that all seemed equally dangerous. The flashlight beam shook in their hand, revealing the person's pale face, eyes wide with fear, fingers barely holding on as exhaustion threatened to pull them under. The storm showed no mercy. Rain blinded, wind roared, and the ground beneath their feet felt unstable, shifting with every movement. For a brief, terrifying moment, the rancher wondered if they had arrived too late. But before doubt could take hold, the horse moved again. It stepped into the water, muscles tightening as the current pushed hard against its legs, body angled instinctively to resist the force. The rancher watched in disbelief as the horse tested the depth inch by inch, finding the safest possible path where none should have existed. It wasn't reckless. It was calculated, as if every step had been memorized long before this night. The rancher shouted for the trapped person to hold on, to keep their grip no matter what, while they followed the horse into the freezing water. The cold hit instantly, stealing breath, numbing limbs, making every movement feel slow and heavy. The current tugged at their legs, threatening to sweep them away, but the horse stood firm, bracing itself, offering a solid anchor in the chaos. The rancher grabbed onto the horse's mane with one hand while extending the other toward the person, stretching as far as they dared. The distance felt endless, just out of reach, and panic flared as the trapped person's grip slipped slightly, a weak cry tearing from their throat. The horse responded immediately, shifting its stance, stepping deeper despite the danger, hooves sliding on unseen obstacles beneath the water. Each movement sent a wave of fear through the rancher, but also awe. This animal, already exhausted from its impossible journey, was giving everything it had left. With one final, desperate reach, the rancher's fingers closed around the trapped person's wrist. Relief surged, but it was quickly replaced by the brutal reality of the situation. Pulling them free would not be easy. The current fought back fiercely, dragging at the person's body, trying to reclaim them. The rancher gritted their teeth, muscles screaming as they pulled, inch by inch, guided by the horse's steady resistance against the water. Slowly, painfully, the trapped person was freed from the fence post, collapsing against the rancher in a sob of shock and exhaustion. But they weren't safe yet. The journey back was just as dangerous, if not more so, with the added weight and weakened state of the rescued person. The horse adjusted without hesitation, positioning itself to shield them from the strongest current, moving sideways with careful precision, creating a narrow path through the water. Every step felt like a gamble, every second stretched unbearably long. At one point, the rancher's footing slipped, water surging up to their chest, panic exploding in their mind. Instantly, the horse leaned in, its body pressing close, providing balance just long enough for the rancher to recover. It was as if the horse understood exactly what was needed, responding before words or signals could be given. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached higher ground. The rancher collapsed to their knees, pulling the rescued person with them, both gasping for air as rain continued to pour down. The horse stood over them, sides heaving, body shaking violently now, not just from cold but from the toll of everything it had endured. The rescued person looked up at the horse, eyes filled with disbelief and gratitude, voice trembling as they tried to speak, but no words came. In that moment, as the storm raged on and the danger was not yet fully behind them, the rancher realized something that sent a shiver through their entire body. This rescue had pushed the horse far beyond its limits, and the cost of what it had done was about to become terrifyingly clear. The rain showed no sign of slowing as the reality of what had just happened settled heavily over everyone. The rescued person lay on the ground, wrapped in a coat someone had rushed out with, coughing weakly as shock gave way to exhaustion. Voices blurred together in the storm as help finally arrived from the ranch, but all of it felt distant compared to the sight that now demanded attention. The horse stood a few steps away, head lowered, legs trembling uncontrollably, its powerful body finally betraying the cost of everything it had done. The rancher noticed it immediately, a sharp fear cutting through the adrenaline that had carried them this far. The horse tried to take a step forward and nearly collapsed, catching itself at the last second, breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. Mud clung to its coat, water streamed from its mane, and its eyes, once sharp with purpose, now looked dull and glassy with fatigue. The rancher moved toward it, speaking softly, hands shaking as they reached for its neck, feeling the violent tremors running through its muscles. This was the moment they had been dreading without realizing it. The storm, the distance, the rescue, it had all taken more than anyone had expected. The horse had crossed a deadly landscape, guided humans through darkness, and stood against a raging current, and now its body was finally demanding payment. Someone suggested bringing it into the nearest shelter immediately, but the horse resisted weakly, legs buckling as if they might give out at any second. Panic spread through the group as they realized how close they were to losing the very animal that had saved a life. The rancher refused to step away, staying close, supporting the horse's weight as best they could, whispering reassurance even as fear twisted their stomach. The storm howled louder, wind tearing at clothes and structures, making every movement harder, more urgent. With careful coordination, they managed to guide the horse toward a covered area, each step slow and uncertain, the animal leaning heavily, trusting completely. Once under shelter, the horse finally sank to the ground, legs folding beneath it as it lay still, chest rising and falling unevenly. For a terrifying few seconds, no one spoke. The sound of rain filled the space, and all eyes were locked on the motionless form. The rancher dropped to their knees beside it, pressing an ear to its chest, desperately listening for a heartbeat strong enough to mean it was still fighting. When they felt it, faint but steady, relief hit like a wave, leaving them dizzy and weak. But relief didn't last long. The horse was alive, yes, but barely holding on. Hypothermia, extreme exhaustion, possible internal injuries, no one could say for sure what damage had been done. The rancher knew one thing with chilling certainty. This story was not over. The storm had not claimed the horse yet, but the danger had simply changed form. As they worked frantically to keep the horse warm, rubbing its legs, covering it with blankets, checking its breathing over and over, the rescued person watched from nearby, tears streaking down their face, fully understanding the sacrifice that had been made on their behalf. The weight of that realization hung heavy in the air. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the shelter, a different battle was unfolding, quieter and far more fragile. The rancher looked down at the horse, heart pounding with a fear they hadn't allowed themselves to feel until now. The animal that had crossed a deadly storm for a desperate reason was now fighting its own fight for survival, and no one knew if what they had done would be enough to save it. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of tension and relentless effort, as if time itself had slowed to test everyone's resolve. The storm battered the shelter from the outside, wind slamming against the walls, rain drumming endlessly on the roof, but inside all focus remained on the horse lying motionless on the cold ground. Its breathing was shallow and uneven, each rise of its chest watched with held breath, each pause sending fear rippling through the small group gathered around it. The rancher refused to leave its side, hands never stopping their steady work, rubbing warmth back into stiffening muscles, whispering words meant as much for themselves as for the animal. Every few minutes, they checked the horse's pulse, the temperature of its ears, the color of its gums, searching desperately for signs that it was stabilizing rather than slipping away. Someone managed to reach a veterinarian by phone despite the failing signal, shouting details over the roar of the storm, receiving instructions that felt both urgent and painfully limited. Keep it warm. Keep it breathing. Do not let it lie flat for too long. Watch for shock. The words echoed in the rancher's mind as they worked, knowing that help could not arrive until the storm eased, knowing that the horse had to survive on sheer strength and care alone for now. The rescued person sat nearby, wrapped in blankets, silent tears continuing to fall as they watched the horse that had saved them now lying helpless. Every so often, their gaze met the rancher's, filled with guilt, gratitude, and a deep, aching fear that the price of survival had been too high. Outside, another violent gust rattled the structure, and the horse reacted faintly, a small twitch running through its body, a weak flick of an ear that sent a surge of cautious hope through everyone present. The rancher leaned closer, speaking softly, urging it to stay, reminding it of the strength it had already shown, as if the animal could understand every word. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the horse shifted, attempting to lift its head before exhaustion forced it back down. It wasn't much, but it was something, a sign that the fight was not over yet. The rancher adjusted their grip, supporting the horse's neck, careful not to strain it, heart pounding with every fragile movement. Minutes stretched into an hour, then another, each one a test of patience and endurance. The storm outside finally began to lose some of its fury, the wind easing just enough to allow the sound of distant thunder to replace the constant roar. With the slight change came a fragile sense of possibility. The rancher checked the horse again and noticed its breathing had steadied, still weak but less erratic than before. Its body remained cold, but the violent shivering had slowed. These small changes felt monumental, like sparks of light in a long, suffocating darkness. Still, fear lingered heavily. The veterinarian's words echoed again in the rancher's mind. Exhaustion of this level could hide deeper injuries. The journey through floodwaters, the strain of bracing against the current, the hours spent fighting the storm could have caused damage that would not reveal itself until it was too late. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the shelter, the rancher allowed themselves a brief moment to breathe, though sleep was impossible. The rescued person finally spoke, voice shaking as they tried to find words that could never truly be enough. They asked about the horse, about whether it would live, about whether there was anything more they could do. The rancher answered honestly, admitting what no one wanted to say aloud. They didn't know. Survival was no longer guaranteed by courage alone. It would depend on what the storm had left behind inside the horse's body. As the light grew stronger, revealing the aftermath of the night outside, downed fences, flooded fields, scattered debris. The rancher knew that once the roads were passable, decisions would have to be made quickly. The horse would need professional care, possibly surgery, possibly weeks of recovery if it survived at all. The thought tightened their chest. This animal had chosen to risk everything to save another life, and now its future hung in the balance. As the horse stirred again, eyes fluttering open briefly before closing once more, the rancher leaned in, hope and fear colliding painfully. Whatever came next would change all of them forever, and the question that hung silently in the air was whether this incredible act of loyalty would end in healing or heartbreak. The hours that followed blurred together into a single, fragile stretch of time where every breath mattered. Outside, the storm slowly began to lose its grip on the land, its violent rage fading into distant thunder and steady rain, but inside the shelter the tension remained unbearable. The horse lay on the ground, its massive body unnaturally still, chest rising and falling just enough to prove it was still alive. The rancher never moved from its side, hands working tirelessly to keep warmth in its legs, fingers pressing gently against its neck, listening over and over for a heartbeat that refused to fade. The veterinarian stayed on the phone as long as the signal allowed, guiding them through each step, reminding them that exhaustion this deep could turn deadly without warning. Every minute felt stolen from fate. The rescued person watched quietly from nearby, wrapped in blankets, eyes never leaving the horse. Guilt sat heavy on their chest, mixing painfully with gratitude. They knew without a doubt that they would not be alive if this animal had not crossed a deadly storm to reach the ranch. That truth settled deep, changing them in a way no words could describe. As the first pale light of morning crept through the cracks of the shelter, something shifted. The horse's ear flicked again, stronger this time. Its breathing, though still shallow, found a steadier rhythm. Slowly, with visible effort, the horse lifted its head a few inches off the ground before letting it rest again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't miraculous. But it was real. The rancher felt their chest tighten as hope finally pushed through the fear. When daylight fully arrived, the storm's aftermath revealed itself outside, flooded fields, broken fences, debris scattered across the land, but the roads were finally passable. A truck arrived, followed shortly by the veterinarian, who moved quickly, calmly, assessing the horse with practiced precision. Hypothermia, severe exhaustion, muscle strain, dehydration, but no fatal internal injuries. Against every expectation, against the odds that night had stacked mercilessly, the horse had survived. Treatment began immediately, fluids administered, blankets replaced with proper warming gear, careful movements ensuring no further damage was done. The rancher stood back only when necessary, eyes never leaving the animal that had changed everything. The rescued person stepped forward, voice trembling, whispering a quiet thank you, not knowing if the horse could hear, but needing to say it anyway. Over the following days, the story spread. Not as a rumor, not as exaggeration, but as a simple, undeniable truth. A horse had crossed a deadly storm to reach one ranch for a desperate reason, not for itself, but to save a life. Ranchers who had worked with animals for decades admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. Veterinarians shook their heads in disbelief. Neighbors stood silently when they came to see the horse resting in recovery, understanding that instinct alone could not explain what had happened. This was something more. Weeks later, when the horse was finally strong enough to stand without help, the rancher watched with tears in their eyes as it took its first steady steps under clear skies. The storm was gone. The danger had passed. But the memory of that night remained etched into everyone involved. The rescued person never left the ranch the same way they arrived. They carried with them a quiet responsibility to live differently, knowing that their life had been preserved by an act of loyalty so powerful it defied logic. And the horse, calm once more, grazing peacefully as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened, became a living reminder of something people often forget. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it runs straight into the storm, guided by a reason so desperate and so pure that even nature itself cannot stop it.